So the speaker of today is Agnes Käll. It's always hard to pronounce for us when there's only dots on the vowels. She is a PhD candidate of the Södertörn University, even more dots on the vowels, making it even harder for foreigners to pronounce these names. The setup of today is slightly different from what you're familiar with if you're following these seminars more regularly. This time there is not a paper being disseminated beforehand, which means you could not prepare as well beforehand. So we'll ask Agnes to speak a little bit longer and speak a bit more elaborate a little bit more on the research she has been doing. And so we give her 25 minutes to present, and then we'll open the floor for discussions. So everybody is then free to ask questions and make comments to the work of Agnes, who is presenting her research on AML supervision in the Nordics and the Baltics. For those of you that are already with the agenda in hand, the next seminar I already announced is on May 8th. It's the same time, same place, so also here on Teams. So put that already in your agenda. But let's now go over the presentation of today. So I'll give the floor to Agnes to present her research.
Thank you. And I will start by share my screen. If it works, can you see it?
Yes, perfect.
Okay, perfect. So yes, my name is Agnes Käll. I think you pronounce it really good. And it's Södertörn University, just like you said. And so this is a presentation of my thesis, my doctoral thesis project, really. And the working title of it is, as you can see, Dawn Raids or Silk Gloves on the institutionalization of anti-money laundering supervision in the Baltics and Nordics. And the project's idea derives actually from my previous work as a Know Your Customer KYC analyst in Swedbank by the time of the money laundering scandal, to which one of the money laundering scandals to which we will come back later in this presentation. And before this scandal, the KYC function had a rather low status within the bank. So the clients, they hated you because of all the questions you would bother them with, and the rest of the bank obviously hated you because you were bad for business. But after the scandals, the attitude towards the KYC unit became more friendly. But then the AML compliance officers started to dislike us because we had a problem with being compliant with the manuals that they came up with from implementing regulations. And the compliance problems that we experienced there as KYC analysts sort of inspired me to think about how these layers of interpretations of the law affect compliance outcomes. And as I have a background in public management studies, I took particular interest in the public agency layer of interpretation. So the puzzling question on which the research design is based is how money laundering could occur despite there being rules against it, and more importantly, regulators supervising compliance with these rules. So that's a very simple question, but to me it was sort of intriguing. And I consult two branches of institutional theory to address this question. So one of them stresses that the way regulated organizations relate to rules in organizational activities affect the general meaning ascribed to these rules. So when it comes to for-profit organizations, for example, they often try to implement compliance measures in ways that do not disturb business, for example. And to take an AML-related example, you can think of a bank implementing a system that flags a very wide range of transactions as suspicious, which then results in thousands and thousands of suspicious transactions reports being filed to the FIU. And while this can indicate a strong structural compliance with AML regulation, it does not improve the detection or prevention of money laundering in practice. And this is referred to as symbolic compliance. And as these symbolic structures spread on to other regulated organizations and eventually are taken as de facto compliance by regulators, it can help explain why money laundering can occur despite the presence of supervisory authorities. But the problem, as I see it with this theory, is that it is mainly focused on how private firms can impact the meaning that public agencies ascribe to regulation. So the other theory that I use focuses on how regulatory interpretations of public agencies influence compliance outcomes. So it helps answering the question that I posed by showing that regulators are not just neutral enforcers of AML rules, but their actions are shaped by political pressures, legitimacy concerns, and also their interactions, of course, with the financial institutions. So rather than simply failing to enforce existing rules, regulators can co-produce a flexible or permissive compliance environment that allows for symbolic compliance with rules while undermining their very enforcement. So the more theoretically informed aim of my project is to understand how public agencies influence regulatory development and under what circumstances such influence come about. And I explore this by focusing on a specific public actor, the supervisory authority, which I think of as acting both as regulator and regulated within this particular field. And specifically, as you know already, I studied the development of AML supervision as communicated and performed by financial supervisory authorities, or FSAs, as I will refer to them, in Denmark, Sweden, and Estonia from 1991 to 2021, which is a development. It starts with the issuance of the first EU AML directive and ends with the decision on the AML regulation, the AMLR, which is the new regulatory package. And this time frame is marked by the so-called Baltic money laundering scandals or cases, what you prefer. And these were media allegations made between 2017 and 2019 of 3 Nordic banks. So it's Danske Bank, Swedbank, and SEB being used for extensive money laundering in their Estonian branches and subsidiaries between 2007 and 2015. So I think these contexts provide a rich course of events, obviously, and are therefore, in my view, suitable for exploring the conditions that allow for public influence on regulatory development. And the empirical study is based on archival material and interviews, and the 270 documents include public communication by the FSAs, media reporting, external report and investigations, and FATF and money evaluations, etc. And all the documents relate more or less to the FSA's AML supervision. And I've conducted 30 interviews with current and former AML inspectors, as I refer to them, like financial inspectors responsible for AML issues, and also their managers in the FSAs primarily, but I've also conducted some complementary interviews with journalists, bankers, and other external experts when access to primary interview prospects has been denied, which happened plenty of times. And here's the summary of the findings in terms of first order concepts, second order themes, and aggregate dimensions. And the first order concepts are what I consider as nuances of organizational engagements, in lack of better words, with regulation. And the second order themes adds a level of abstraction to the organizational engagement, and then the aggregate dimensions I refer to as modes of organizing. So the first order concepts sort of constitutes the second order themes, which in turn make the aggregate dimensions. Is what I'm trying to show here. And we will come back to these findings up next. And the third column, the aggregate dimensions, represent what is currently called phases of AML supervision in my thesis. I'm not sure whether they will remain as phases, given that the time bracketing is very skewed, with the initial phase covering a much longer time span than the remaining two. So in the first and longest phase of AML supervision, from the 1990s to around 2016, Nordic banks expanded. It started with the Nordic banks expanding into the Baltics, where weak oversight and an influx of non-resident clients made them very vulnerable to the laundering of Russian money towards offshore havens. And during this period, AML supervision was mainly passive and some symbolic, with limited resources and little political backing. So the FSA focused on formal compliance rather than proactive enforcement, and they relied on mainly on self-reported data from the obliged entities, and were mainly conducting off-site inspections. So in Sweden, also internal tensions shaped a culture of what I refer to as supervision with silk gloves, which I argue meant that banks were made able to shape compliance norms to their advantage. And although major scandals like the Russian laundromat and the Panama Papers began surfacing by the 2014 and the Panama Papers in 2016, real supervisory action was quite uncommon. But there is an exception in Estonia where the FSA actually took decisive steps to purge Danske Bank's non-resident clients already by the end of this first phase. But that sort of stands out from the rest. But however, in view of the lukewarm interest for AML at this time, the Estonian FSA, and this is quite important for what happens next, the Estonian FSA did not get much response from its Danish colleagues when it alerted repeated and major money laundering risks in Danske Bank. And this came to be a point of contention in the aftermath of the Danske Bank scandal. And the second phase, from 2017 to 2019, saw the money laundering scandals unfolding in the media, starting with Berlingske's exposure of the Danske Bank case from 2017. And in 2018, the European Banking Authority initiated a break of the union law case against the Estonian and Danish FSAs for their alleged lack of action and interaction in the Danske Bank case. And in 2019, also the Swedbank and later the SEB scandals broke in Swedish television. And in the aftermath of the scandals, the FSAs entered a phase of vulnerable organizing, I argue. And this period is very much marked by crisis management and intense public scrutiny. And during this time, the FSAs shifted between a compliance mode where they stressed their own innocence and pointed fingers at other potential wrongdoers, in relation to the scandals, and a regulator mode where they sort of pushed for new rules, more resources, and a more professional approach to AML supervision. And connected to the later trend was also substantial upgrading of supervisory practices. And here I argue that improvisation became a key tool as the FSAs were trying to navigate uncertainty and also redefine their roles, so to speak, as supervisors. And this is because they often did so in a reactive and performative manner, which was more shaped by external pressure than established AML inspection routines. And then we enter the third phase of AML supervision, starting in the early 2020s, where AML supervision had evolved into a proactive and coordinated effort with a significant shift from national discretion to centralized EU-led control. So the FSAs moved from kind of defensive stances to taking leadership roles in cross-border collaboration. So they engaged in joint inspections between countries and supervisory colleges and policy dialogues that paved the way for a more harmonized approach to AML supervision. And this phase also saw the establishment of firmer, more standardized rules and clearer enforcement protocols driven largely by EU directives and the planned creation of a centralized AML authority, the AMLA. And this supranational shift reduced the FSA's individual regulatory discretion, embedding their activities within a broader European framework, which then aimed at consistency, accountability, and strong deterrence. And this is actually my last slide, and I'm trying to conclude here what I've tried to show you, and that's how AML supervision has evolved from being a peripheral task to becoming a central, urgent responsibility for national FSAs. And this process has been driven, I think, by scandal, crisis, and also increasing EU oversight. And over time, supervision shifted from being very loosely organized practices to becoming detailed, centralized regulation under supranational control. And based on the first round of more empirically based analysis, I have listed three preliminary conclusions here. And the first one is that public agencies, more than has been claimed before, participate in shaping regulation. And their influence is particularly strong in times of crisis and scrutiny. Because under these conditions, they not just enforce rules, but they help shape the meaning of the law through their interpretations, responses, and enforcement actions. And second of all, enforcement is an important source of meaning making, in that the meaning of AML regulation is not just found in legal text, but is also created through the practical performance of enforcement, especially when law is ambiguous or underdeveloped. And the third point, which is old hat, I guess, is that national influence becomes diminished, with increased transnationalization of regulation. That is, the more regulation becomes transnationally integrated, the more constrained becomes the ability of national authorities to shape legal meaning through professional judgment. And that's basically it. I'm sorry if I didn't take all the time. that you ask.
No worries. We're happy that you stay within the time. Often we have the opposite problem that we have to restrict our speakers of stop speaking and starting the discussion. So the floor is open to anybody. Please raise your hand or on camera or with the buttons within Teams, and then I'll give turns to whoever raises their hand first. Mark.
Yeah, so Agnes, thank you very much. Congratulations on Agnes, for those who weren't on the call earlier, is going to defend, we hope, in November, right, of this year. So we look forward to hearing the results. Yeah, so I think, first of all, it's great to have, I mean, I have said before, we need more information about what's going on within banks to understand how decisions around money laundering or anti-money laundering are being made. So there's sort of a cloud of questions here. Let me just pick one or two to ask. So why would, in thinking about this co-creation, the role of public agencies in co-creating a particular sort of regulatory atmosphere, why would an agency charged with regulating want to, or unintentionally maybe, co-create a space in which there is weak regulation, right? We would assume that there would be the opposite, right? There's sort of even some basic sort of Weberian bureaucratic understandings, right? You assume that they want more control and more budgets and more people. And so what are the conditions under which, I suppose, you would see a public agency, unless it's intentional sabotage, I say, in this current political moment, what are the conditions under which you would see public agencies sort of co-produce a weak regulatory environment? That would be one. And sort of related to that question of co-creation, that's not the word you use, but the co-production of this environment. I would like to hear you say a little bit more about who are the others involved, who are the co-producers besides the public agencies. I think you imply it's the private firms, the regulated. But then you note that the transnationalization of this has really shaped what the FSAs do. And so it seems to me like some of the story, I would just like to see who those third parties are besides the private actors and the regulator and the regulated. Who are the third parties that are engaged in this co-production, which seem important?
Thank you. So starting with the first question, how come this environment is being co-produced when you assume the opposite? Well, my answer to this would be that in the beginning, like in the first phase, when this was not a very hot political topic, I think the tendency that management within the FSAs, they wanted to keep the doors open to be able to move between the authority and the financial institutions. They usually go in between management positions within the public and within the private. So I think that's one main reason why you could say that they're co-producing this legal environment. I think there's a word for this, the concept for it, but I'm not exactly sure what it is. It's like revolving doors or something like that in capture theory. Yeah. That is one, and also that not just management, but the employees, like the AML inspectors, they also become, and the more actually the AML becomes an interesting and valuable skill, AML compliance, that the more likely it is that the financial institutions, as you probably know, will offer better salaries for doing quite the same jobs. So that's also, I think that relationship is sort of important here. but also the fact that it wasn't really politically interesting, and therefore therefore the financial institutions had more influence, could exercise more influence on the meaning of regulation by acting upon it in a more frequent way than did the public officials or the inspectors.
I'll chime in on this particular issue. And here I'm channeling Joris Furveda, which is that the incentives of the banks are to not comply. Money laundering, laundered money is as valuable as legitimate money. And the regulator then has the problem that it's enforcing rules that discomfort the bank, that sort of reduce the profitability of banks. Many of the other regulations are not of that kind, and the regulator and the regulated have similarly aligned incentives. So why isn't it just the regulators are not particularly good at this? They've not been involved in criminal investigation before, and they are coming into a different relationship with the banks than they usually have as supervisors. Is more confrontational. Aren't those comparably important as the other factors that you measure?
Absolutely. Absolutely. I realize that I have not elaborated on this point enough. And I think that's because I have more or less just reached the analysis right now. I haven't really engaged with it properly. But this is a really good point that I really need to elaborate on.
And it's Joris's point. I was merely it on.
So I've been.
He's being characteristically shy.
I'm trying to moderate as well. No, but I've been working on a paper where we looked into whether this finding, what kind of effects it has for the bank, and we had different theories on whether this should shy away the criminal money or would it actually attract criminal money. Because it could be that if it's known that the Danske Bank or any other bank is involved in a scandal and their AML standards are not up to the right level, that this could attract criminal money. And this might be good for the bank because that is more money coming in, more customers, more money to be made. And so in that line, my question was, because you talk about this, you call it silk hand phase, like the phase where the supervisors were not that strong and were not so fearful on the institutions. My question is that known now, based on your research and you talking to people in the field, looking back at the period, or was this publicly known? Because if this is publicly known, if everybody knows in the Nordic and Baltic states, they're not taking this serious, the supervisor is not strong enough, banks are not doing enough, is that why the Russian money went through these channels? So did this weak supervision lead to the Russian money, or was it just not noticed for a while because of it? So what was it? Was it known that it was so weak, or did you find that out later?
I think it was a combination of the both. Actually, there was this wasn't really very much like scrutinized or researched area also, but there was a report from Uppsala University in Sweden where I think it was the East Indian Institute or something like that. They highlighted that Sweden had become, Swedish banks had become highlighted as good places for laundering money in the Baltics because of their failing controls. So I think it was known in these for the money launderers,
Okay.
but perhaps not for the
And this was
public.
published before the Russian money started to flow into these institutions.
I guess, I mean, I have a quite a long like section about this in this, but actually it starts with the establishment of these Nordic banks, which was sort of like the Wild West in the Baltics there. You know, it was shortly after the fall of the Soviet Union, and there was so the Nordic banks started to acquire local banks, which were already, you know, wide open to criminal money.
Yeah.
And also, I think with the EU entrance, the Baltic countries became viewed as sort of like the intermediary.
The
between,
gateway.
The place where you could launder money, Soviet money, former Soviet, you know, criminal money into the, you know, legitimate banking system.
Yeah, I think this is quite an important implication from your research, that we talk often about this prevention effect of a lot of the AML regulation. The hope that with having all of the regulation in place, that we prevent the money laundering from happening in the first place. And if we indeed see that weak regulation leads to a flow of this money or continues this flow of money, that will be an important empirical finding, I think. Sorry, I see that Mike already had his hand up for quite a while.
It's okay. I'm used to being neglected. And deservedly. Yeah, I think the precise order of this, perhaps we can just have an iterative discussion of so far. It doesn't need to be generally known that the banks in the Baltics were neglectful or were treating the legislation and the regulation as being purely symbolic. It only needs to be known among some key nodal actors who can communicate it. There's no reason why they would broadcast that to everybody. And they can learn from experience, from, you do something. It's a bit like some of the escalating fraud, internal fraud issues. You do something, you find nobody reacts to it, so you escalate what you're doing. Now, whether to come to Joris's point, it's not just a question, it's a question of whether you think anybody will do something about it and freeze all your assets would be the cognitive thing for the criminals. They mightn't care if something happens after the event. So it would be both the banks, the regulators, and the criminal authorities combined. So it's worthwhile, if you haven't thought of this already, Agnes, separating out those different components of the control process. I mean, I don't think there's anything inconsistent in what you've been saying with what a lot of people have traditionally argued, including me, about the AML process, which is that a lot of countries go along for it because they know they have to, because they don't want to get a bad report. They're all members of Moneyval, if not FATF. They do it because they know that's what being part of the world system is. They don't necessarily take it very seriously. And I wonder if you can, a lot of us kind of think about the very consensual nature of the trust-based approach in the Scandies, whether that applies to the Baltics or primarily just to the Scandinavian banks operating in the Baltics. They just Agnes, and if you don't see much active enforcement, then why bother? You carry on. You know, this issue about the alignment of interests, or the conflicts of interest, just don't really have. It's not so much a conflict if you think your job is to stimulate the local economy. Think about the whatever financial problems the governments of Estonia, Latvia, etc. were having before. You want a dynamic economy, etc. So I don't find any of this so problematic. Why should we expect the banks to be responding, you know, in an aggressive way? I take Mark's point, and then I'll shut up. I take Mark's point that there are some regulators who might want to be muscular, or the opposite right now in the US. They might want to be muscular if they want to grow, but they might expect, and reasonably expect, that if they're muscular, they'll either won't get promoted themselves as individuals, or and there your point about the revolving door is highly relevant. But why is it? It's a final question. That in the States, up to a point, you get a better job from being muscular as a regulator, not under Trump particularly, but if you make your name as a regulator against the financial institution, you might end up getting a better job than if you were just passive, because there's a kind of masculinity culture of successful fighting, challenging things that gets you noticed and gets you a better job. Is that not present at all in any of the Baltics? So those are just some additional, if you like, cultural themes I'm suggesting for you to play with.
Thank you. I'm not sure I got this particular question.
Oh, sorry. There is a bit of
no.
drama.
I just wanted to clarify if there was a question involved or if it was some takeaways, because I found it really interesting as takeaways.
Well, I was trying to give you some suggestions to think about and perhaps respond to. I mean, you might know the answers to some of these. So, in a way, they're all questions of a general nature for you to analyze and perhaps respond to.
Yeah, a first thought that I had was like the Swedish example, because here it became a really intense scrutiny. Like one of the Swedish newspapers were doing a review on the AML unit in the Swedish FSA, which was quite damaging for the FSA. And I think that like what sparked this was first of all that the general director, or is that the word? The managing director.
Director General,
is that the word?
Yeah, it's that way around.
He had in response to the whistleblower in the Danske Bank case. I'm not sure how familiar you are with this story, but there was a whistleblower coming forward in 2013 or something. Yeah, exactly. But yeah. He's been sort of, I don't know. They have toned down the importance of him, so I'm not sure how legit that testimony was. But anyway, the Swedish Director General, he responded with not very much interest taken, and also they repeatedly said that the Swedish bank do not have the business model that Danske Bank has, and therefore are not as vulnerable to this to money laundering to the extent of the Danske Bank case, which proved completely false. Obviously, the money launderers just crossed the street when Danske Bank closed down their non-resident portfolio. Then the money launderers just crossed the street to the Swedbank and SEB offices. But that was, I think, the cultural aspect was that it was very hard for the Swedish FSA to confirm that this would even ever occur in a Swedish bank. You know, with this, they had this reputation of being very strict and but just not on this particular area. And then. And also in the same spirit, he was like, well, you need to be strong, but you need to be nice, because when you have all these muscles in relation to the banks. So, yeah, I don't know if that was an answer, but that is what stands out if you compare the three contexts. And in Denmark, we have Danske Bank, which is a very, like a major institution. Culturally, it's IKEA for Sweden. It's huge, which also made the authorities kind of weak in relation to them. So, which also affected the interrelationships between the Estonian FSA and the Danish FSA. So there are some cultural differences with the Swedes being very protective of their reputation as a economically stable nation, and Denmark being very being very weak in relation to the strong financial institutions, and Estonia just being very weak in general, small country, and high, like in relation to the Nordic countries, there's a hierarchy that matters to whether they gain traction for their alerts and stuff like that.
Yeah. Peter? Yeah.
So I've one substantive question, then a methodological question. So the substantive question is, you started by saying what I think is generally believed, which is that suspicious activity reports have no consequence for money laundering levels. And I want to argue that suspicious activity reports enable law enforcement agencies to build better intelligence bases, and that helps them deal with the predicate crimes, and in that way, indirectly, potentially affect money laundering levels. I'm not saying that's strong, but I wouldn't be as dismissive as you are of the value of these things. Now, the evidence isn't strong, but Mirko Nazari and I have a paper in which we cite a number of studies that show that the SARs do lead to stronger intelligence bases, and I infer that leads to less of the high-level predicate crimes. Could be wrong about that, but I wouldn't just do that as the assumption. The methodological one is I presume this is in a political science department. Your dissertation?
Business studies.
Well, anyway, I did not recognize this analytical frame, the aggregate. What was the term you were using for the third column?
I sort of left out the whole analytical framework that I use, but this I did a thematic analysis, and it's based on the sort of a grounded
theory, right?
Yeah, exactly. But you don't use the grounded theory.
So it's inductive.
It's the minefield.
Yeah, I mean, that just looked like fancy labels. I mean, can you give us some meaning to those aggregate terms?
I can try. What I'm trying.
Maybe Agnes, can you put them back up? I don't know if you're doing that right now, but
Yeah.
maybe put those back on the screen while you're making reference to them.
Sure.
Okay.
Can you see it? Maybe you see my.
Yeah, we can see it.
Speaking.
Yeah, but maybe
too.
make it full screen, Agnes. That'd be...
Yeah,
we don't see it full screen. We see it within the.
There you go. There you go.
Now we did.
Okay. So what I try to show here is first of all what I like the first order of themes that I scattered when I was analyzing, doing a thematic analysis of the material, and these are very much like, also these are aggregate, of course, to the thousands and thousands of codes that I made. But I think that after a while doing this analysis, there are some themes that have sort of survived a lot of rounds of review that I think I could see. But what I was looking at, I think from the beginning, was how like active engagement with this task, like both as a regulatory construct, like formulating what AML supervision is, and also acting upon that understanding. And these themes are what I could see in the material, basically. And also this adds up to this aggregate dimensions, which I call phases here, but it's mostly like, did you conduct AML regulation in order to fulfill a preventive mission, or did you just react upon pressures from public scrutiny or scandals that broke? Or so during the reactive phase of organizing, then you would react on public scrutiny, but and in the vulnerable phase of organizing was something in between, like improvising AML supervision, because you had not really established the proper routines for conducting inspection. And then in the proactive phase, you're actually highly institutionalized practice of AML supervision. It's aiming for fulfilling the preventive aim of it.
Is this a chronological sequence?
It is. I mean, obviously the reactive phase is stands for itself, and it's the first phase. The other ones are more overlapping. So it's not good to call it phases. I just did it in order not to be completely confused.
And can you explain one step earlier? So you said you read reports and you did interviews. And so then you have a bunch of material, a bunch of words. And then you use that with some natural language processing or something to get to this first column, or how do you get from empirics to these results?
Yeah, exactly. You could see it as a chronology, that the first column is the first step of analyzing. Basically, just seeing what are the reoccurrences, the patterns, and then I refine this, going through it all over again, and then I try to group them into this more abstract forms of engagement with regulation. And then I try to add another layer of abstraction, looking at the very organizing at the organizational level. Does that
But if
make sense? I don't know.
Can I maybe, I think what yours was also asking is how, remember you're talking to a bunch of economists, right? So how do you process that information? So are you using, for example, like an Atlas TI kind of programming? What's the sort of coding process look like prior to first order concepts? Are you reading those as sort of, I assume it's sort of a reflexive process where you read, identify patterns, code those, read through the material again, find places where those line up, and then that all sort of does it this way. There is a much more high-tech version of doing that as well. So that's, I think, maybe one of the questions is how you coded the information that you gathered.
Yeah, I use a software program called Max QDA or something, which is a basic. You can organize all the documents that you have, like how many, like unlimited, and then you just basically highlight. As a first round of coding, you just highlight things that you find interesting, and then you realize that, oh, these things come again, and they come again, and they come again in different shape and form. So that's how it starts, and then it just you narrow it down to only a few, like a narrow pieces of text, yeah, and quotes, and yeah.
And so would this allow you to see which first order concepts appear more or less in different time periods? Because then you would be able to say this report is from this year, and then we see mostly these type of concepts. And then we might be able to understand how there's been a change over time in terms of this approach, the supervision.
Yeah, I mean, I haven't done that, but that's definitely a way to do it. That's a more like a quantitative version of thematic.
Yeah, sorry, we are.
But yeah, but it would make sense to do that actually.
Yeah, but I mean, related to some of the questions also about culture is that what you described is that there was a period where it was almost a naive, false sense of security. This doesn't happen in Sweden. We don't have to be so strong as a supervisor because there's not really any danger there. This happens more often in all kinds of fields where supervision plays a role. And then a certain crisis can sometimes lead to a very big shift in approach. I remember talking to one of the heads of FinCEN that was working there, like the American institution fighting financial and economic crimes. They were mostly, before 9/11, they were mostly working on insider trading, that kind of stuff. And they had a small portfolio on AML and CTF, counter-terrorist finance. That was a bit on the side, 5% of their work. 9/11, the day after, so literally one night over, suddenly these priorities shifted completely. The government suddenly realized we had no clue what was going on. We were not noticing this financing of terrorism that happened, that led to 9/11. And so suddenly 95% of the priority portfolio was suddenly AML and CTF. And this was a crisis that led to a completely different approach and could also lead to a possible overreaction. So it could be that there was first a false sense of security, too little oversight, but then there might be an overreaction. Do you have the feeling that that also happened here? So is the sort of supervision now over the top in terms of how strict they are in the Baltics and Nordics, or is it now aligned with how it should be? What's your feeling on how this has changed?
I think actually when I started doing my interviews, it was sort of over the top, very intense, and they were constantly rearranging, reorganizing, and they were moving the AML unit in between different. Yeah, it was just very intense, and you could also notice when sending out interview requests that they were very careful, and they didn't want to be quoted, or they wanted to review their quotes, even though it's it's not a, you know what it is. I'm not there to put someone on the spot, but anyway, it was quite a different tone then. But today I think it has sort of gone back to a little bit more peripheral issue. I think now at least the financial institutions constantly claim that they're taking this very seriously, and they invest a lot, and they feel like they're the ones that actually know this field, and you know, and also because obviously in Sweden we have a lot of we have a very high inflation, for example, and so at the moment the economy. The stability of the economy is way more important to the FSAs today, I think.
And when did you start your research? You said that the period was different.
Sorry?
You said in the beginning of my research, but when was that?
In 2021, I think I started looking into this more closely. Yeah. So it's been
I
quite
understand you don't want to.
Joris, I think Mark has a question.
Oh, yeah. Oh. Sorry. Mark.
You're muted.
Yeah.
Sorry, hit the wrong button. It's related to what Joris was just talking about, actually, because one of the questions I had from the beginning was there's a way to read this all as this sort of teleological improvement and learning, and there's been scandals, and now we're taking it very seriously, right? We're very good bankers now. We thought we were before, but now we know we are. And so, as someone who has written about the symbolic compliance in the AML space, one of the challenges it can all be symbolic compliance, right? So how do we know there has been what maybe we would think about as a legitimate cultural change in the notion of, in the sort of world of compliance as a result of this, or is it just a different form of symbolic compliance? It's just another set of the emperor's new clothes all over again.
Yeah, that's a really good question. I'm not sure. Actually, I have sort of, not to become, overwhelmed by all the data. I've tried to make an absolute stop at the end of 2021, because after that is unlimited amount of writings about AML in general, and I wouldn't say supervision in particular, but it's just I've sort of stopped there just for the sake of my well-being. But I will definitely consider this while writing it up now in the the third phase that I'm struggling with quite a bit.
Yeah, indeed. Yeah. When wrapping up research, you're also supposed to think about what this all means for now, and also how to get from here to the future. And so we might have to start thinking about how do we get beyond this symbolic gestures, and how do we start to really understand whether it's real or symbolic what is happening. And you might want to give some reflections on how this should be done, so that we are not constantly looking back and finding out it was all symbolic. But that we actually can advance the field in this sense. Thanks a lot for being here. We reached the end. It went way quicker than you think, as always. Thanks a lot for the very interesting presentation. I hope the discussion helped you. I thought it was very interesting. So thanks a lot for being here. The next seminar is on May 8th, same time, same place. Thank you all for attending.